ideas and words across the knowledge fields. So go back to the idea of the brain powering up in all different spheres. When you're intellecting, you're firing all the different parts, and you're firing up the bits that deal with feeling or with visualization or with pure abstraction. And you're making connections between them all. That's what intelligence is. Intelligere is to choose and connect up the words and ideas in Latin. And somebody that can do that is what we mean by someone who's intelligent. All it means is they've got all the bits of their brain working, and they can interconnect ideas. And so that's why I'm involved with the World Intellectual Wisdom Forum. What we're trying to do is get intellectuals together across different cultures and thought systems and belief systems and all kinds of isms to come together and say, what is the common intellect of us all? Okay, so in philosophy, Aristotle said the immortal part of the human being is called the nous. That's the intellect. It's Greek. That doesn't die. When your body dies and your ego dies and you surrender, your nous lives on. It is immortal. And it goes back to the divine nous, which is God, in Aristotle's jargon, the theos, that is the divine intellect. And we are like little sparks from that. Now, I find this a beautiful, beautiful story, and I love this. I'm an Aristotelian, right, as well as everything else, because it makes sense to me, right? And in the history of Greek philosophy, which talks about Greek philosophy, has its own word for enlightenment, which is lysis, Lysis. Now, that is a Pythagorean word, which most people have never heard of, but we've all heard of psychoanalysis or analytical philosophy. And if we've done maths, we've learned how to analyse equations, right? It all comes from the same root. Analysis is to set free or resolve a problem. Analysis. So lysis means to set free. And it relates to the idea of water and dissolving a problem. So in the Greek mind, if you have a problem, whatever it is, I really love my wife, but I also really love my mistress, and it's really complicated, or whatever, then you go and see a philosopher who teaches you analysis, how to resolve the problem. Like, just be faithful to the wife and be friends with the mistress. That's the easiest way, or whatever, And lysis, or lysis as the Greeks call it, is the root of psychoanalysis, which is the setting free of the neurotic foibles of the psyche. Freud knew a bit about this. He didn't go into it as deep as I would have liked, because he never looked at Eastern thought. He was afraid of Eastern stuff and too much mysticism, did his head in. But Jung loved it. And that's why Jungian psychology is called analytical psychology. He understood all what I'm talking about. He didn't have time to do as much of the work as I've been doing, because he kept seeing neurotic patients all the time and worked as a psychiatrist. So that's a really important word, lysis. And it comes from the Pythagorean tradition and the Orphic, down through Plato, who used the same term for enlightenment when they were teaching in the academy, down to Aristotle, who, this is what they were doing with higher education. This is the point of it. Academic education is about setting free people from our particularities and our little neuroses where we get into tribal thinking. Even academics do it. I'm a sociologist. I'm better than you psychologists. I study real society and people. No, I'm an economist. I really study the real world. I do money and banking and finance. I'm a mathematician. I'm the most important, because none of you could do anything without me. I'm the mathematician. And so all these academic tribes fight in the university sector for funding and status and publications. And they've lost sight of what academia is about, which is about lysis and about enlightenment and setting free. And that's why I was delighted when I went to India and met my Jain friends. And I realised that, no, some of the enlightened Greeks made it to India and brought back goodies to share about enlightenment, especially this guy Pyrrho of Elis that brought back the idea of epoche. I'll come to that in a minute. Another word that one has to study if one wants to really dive into all this stuff is reason. Because, okay, a little important announcement. In Latin, the term for a person of enlightenment or an enlightened person is eruditas. If you're enlightened in Latin, you're erudite, which is what we mean in English of somebody who's highly educated, highly cultured. And I think it's a bit sad that it's got that meaning. It's not for normal people. They can't all be erudite. What I think we should bring back eruditas as a common right of all of us, because it means enlightened. You may not have read 10,000 books or been to 100 universities, but you still have wisdom innately, common sense. You can still know what is right from what is wrong, and you can still access reason, and you can then access divine reason. So the great Latin philosophers like Cicero talked about this. Reason is the image of God in us, in effect, because God is the reason behind the universe with a capital R. And in Stoic philosophy, again, they understand reason. So Marcus Aurelius, the great Greek Stoic, Roman emperor, philosopher, wrote about reason as applied to everyday problems, how we can solve all these conflicting, demands on our time or whatever. So it's applying reason. And that goes back to this same idea as the enlightened mind, which is ultimately the enlightened mind behind the universe, the creator. Now let's go east, because interestingly the term buddhi in Sanskrit means intellect. Enlightened mind, buddhi. We all have it. We all have buddhi in us, and Indian philosophers being what they are, they've studied it, and it's got 10 forms, and it's got 8 preconditions, and it's got 20 consequences, and so on. If you study buddhi in the Hindu philosophical tradition, it's mind-blowingly fascinating. So this one lineage took the idea and ran with it, and the founder was called Buddha, meaning he's got an enlightened intellect. His mind has become totally pure, right? But it's the same mind we've all got. It's just he actualized it. He turned it on. It's like the phone comes with apps, but they've got to be turned on, if you want. So buddhi, very important word. Other words for enlightenment in the Eastern traditions, one that I love is samadhi. Samadhi is to die forly intelligent word. It's what, if you're on the Hindu yogic path, that's what you get at the end. But samadhi comes from 2 roots in Indo-European, which are the same in English. It means same, making everything the same, and doing. So it's literally doing sameness. So a person in enlightened consciousness or in samadhi, whatever you throw at them, they just go on smiling because it's the same. It's the same stuff, right? And there's the famous story of when Richard Alpert, the psychologist from Harvard, went to see his guru and took him some LSD because he was so excited about its effects. Gave it to the guru, who thought he'd take one, but he swallowed a whole handful. And he just carried on teaching and smiling the whole time because, it's the same stuff. He was already there in the enlightened consciousness. I mean, the LSD can only take you up there, but then you're already there. We're already enlightened. All the LSD does is remind us of that. Is what Alpert got, and that's why he changed his name to Ram Dass. And he's still going, bless him. Hello, Ram Dass. He's like the guru of all this stuff, who was there back in the 60s. And if you haven't read his autobiography, he tells the story of that LSD guru chap. And that's what samadhi is. It's the test of. Now, this is a conversation, well, what if somebody comes and chops off a baby's head in front of you? You just say, oh, well, same. Or do you apply discriminating awareness? Do you make certain distinctions? this is something we'll be discussing on this course when we talk, for instance, about the Christian forms of enlightenment, which I'm going to be talking about tomorrow, and the Islamic forms. They would say, no, you step up and you intervene if somebody starts chopping babies' heads off. You stop them. You don't just sit there and say, well, same, So there's philosophical and ethical questions to talk about this. And then we got the lovely word nirvana, which is another great word for enlightenment. And it's a difficult word because it's the blowing out of vanity. The actual meaning is no vanity. And we've all got little bits of vanity that we carry about, My purple cloak, I don't want to lose it, whatever. And so nirvana is when you're prepared to let all that vanity go. And then what you get is you get the whole of Harrod's gift shop of enlightened goodies instead. The more you can get rid of your little stuff that you cling on to, the more the universe throws at you all the really big and amazing stuff that's coming your way. It seems to me that's how it works. Because as I was saying earlier, I think when we hold on to stuff that we think we need, that's limiting us from what we actually need, which is like amazing stuff. And so I know that my friends, when they do teachings with CEOs and stuff, if you've got someone on a path and they've got to do this and got to do that, actually if you get them into the void space of enlightenment, they get 100 new, brilliant, amazing ideas that are even better than the ones they're running with. So learning to navigate between the emptiness and the fullness is the enlightenment game. There are times when it's good to be full of stuff and lots of ideas and projects, but then you should always remember that they're actually just from the void anyway, and they go back to it, and they come from the divine mind, which is what you get when you go into the void. That's the omniscient divine intelligence, which we all come from. So anyway, that's all in nirvana. So, when you blow out the candle, then you can see the stars. Is how it works. When I'm sitting on my terrace in France and got the candle on, I can't see the stars very clearly. But when I turn it off, they come out and play. And when you get nirvana, you drop all your human neurotic anxieties, and then you get divine intelligence and bliss, which is your birthright. The Jain concept, they also have something like nirvana. They don't use the term. They have Kaivalya Jnani, which is the Jain term for enlightenment, which is a lovely word, and it's Jnani is knowledge, and it's the same root as the word Gnostic, as in the Gnostic Church and so on. And Kaivalya means wholeness. It's non-differentiated into parts. So normal knowledge comes in parts. You buy a bit of law studies or geography or history or whatever. Kaivalya Jnana is you get the whole lot. You have to become omniscient in every branch of knowledge, because now you're downloading from cosmic intelligence direct. And the books are there to just to check you're on the right path. Oh, Aristotle pointed that out. Okay, fine. I'm on the right path here. Or Shankara did, or Nagarjuna did, or whatever. So Kaivalya Jnana is what you get. And in the Jain concept, and I like this, liberated souls go to the top of the universe, and they all meet up there, and they have a chinwag out of body about, how was your 24 billion incarnations? Nice to see you here. Nice you got through, And they're like sages having a chinwag at the top of the universe with total omniscient recall of everything. I call that going to the heavenly library. I personally, like the books. But I've known some amazing enlightened Jains. Acharya Tulsi, who I met, one of the wisest Jains this last century, who taught me some amazing stuff, and his disciple, Mahapragya. These are great Svetambara Jains who, but the point is, when you've reached that Kaivalya Jnana, you then do something with it. So Acharya Tulsi walked across India, something like 100,000 miles barefoot, on foot. He met every single president and prime minister of India since Gandhi's time, since Nehru, and he told them off when they were causing trouble and when they were causing riots or violence. He knew Muslim prime ministers, he knew Hindu ones, and he wasn't afraid to tell them off, And they would come to him for audiences because they knew he was on a totally different plane than politics, cabal. And this is why I think we need people like that to remind us that politics and power play and money and all that's just one little band. We need to dial up the tune and get the Enlightenment band, which is where these saints are. And then the official CEO type people should go and learn from them. That's what, because at the moment it's the wrong way round. They're putting the saints in prison and ruining the world with their war games. The Jains are totally strict on non-violence. You don't get an audience if you're killing people. A bit like Gandhi, he when he was fastening to death in Calcutta, he made the Muslims who were all rioting stop the killing, and they had to surrender the machetes and everything. And it was a Hindu fanatic that killed him. It's such a tragedy. So I worked with the Gandhi Foundation as their school education coordinator for some years, and Gandhi was applying enlightenment, so it's about applied enlightenment in the real world. I talked about epoche, just to remind people, that's a really important word in Western philosophy. So in Western philosophy, which I'm like a practitioner of as well, there's a thing called phenomenology, where you don't make a judgment about reality. You don't say, I'm a materialist, I'm an idealist, I'm a whatever. You just look at the phenomenon and you suspend judgment, you practice epoche. This was the idea of Husserl, great European philosopher. And it's a big movement. He was a great thinker. And it influenced Heidegger, another great German philosopher, and Sartre, and some of the best 20th century philosophers in European thought. So the point of epoche is to reach a place of unknowing in which you can then achieve a download of divine knowing. To summarize 1,000 years of intellecting in a sentence, right? So if you come at a problem knowing it all, you can't learn anything about it because there's no listening there. If you come at it not knowing, you'll be able to learn stuff new. And that's where beginner's mind comes in. We were talking about this earlier in mindfulness training. As a philosopher, you get far further if you always come at it with beginner's mind. Every time I read Sartre or Aquinas or Heidegger, I know nothing at all. I'm just like a little child starting out, paddling. As Sir Isaac Newton said, one of the greatest natural philosophers of the last few hundred years, had this lovely quote, and he was the guy that helped invent calculus. He measured the gravitational force of the universe and worked out gravity and the maths of it, and all kinds of other stuff. Optics, discovered the rainbow of light. And yet he said, towards the end of his life, he said, all my life I felt like a little child on the seashore, tossing pebbles into the ocean, and all around me the ocean of knowledge lies unexplored. He knew so much that he knew so little. The more you truly know and come at stuff with beginner's mind, then you know you really know very little at all, in comparison to the divine omniscience, which is the ocean. And by the way, the word Dalai Lama means the ocean of wisdom. So Dalai Lama is another way of talking about this. So yes, epoche, suspend judgment, beginner's mind, dive into the ocean of wisdom and swim as much as you can and love it. The secret of philosophy is to love wisdom, not to accumulate stuff. You're not going to get money, sex and power this way. That's the wrong way. You're going to give up stuff, but you will find divine wisdom, which is immortal and priceless, and you take that after you die. Like it's let's call it an immortality investment project. Socrates said philosophy is the art of learning to die well. You know, it's it's something we've all got to do. Okay, another word I want to share is synthesis. Because samadhi is making everything the same, enlightenment as making things the same. Synthesis is a Greek word for the same kind of thing. So, and Hegel is the master of understanding this enlightenment. Great philosopher. He said the problem with logic is it's been doing too much analysis. Everybody's fighting for like dominance and control, a bit like Europe in the 19th century, all these different rival forces and nations were fighting for control. Hegel said, no, what we should be doing is synthesizing everything. Life is dialectical, there's all these oppositional forces, but let's synthesize the opposites and then take them to a higher level. So it's like a prefigurement of quantum physics, whereby, you know, when the electric particles jump to a higher station, they then release energy. And that's what synthesizing is. So Hegel's logic is brilliant. His philosophy was, and he wrote a book called The Phenomenology of Spirit, by the way. So he was applying what I was talking about, suspension of judgment, to our actual subjective experience of what it is to be a spirit. Like, you know, mind-blowing stuff for a young man in his 20s still, in Jena, which in Germany was then the hothouse of Enlightenment thinking in 19th century Europe. Hegel was there, so was Schelling, who was another genius at the same time, and so was Schiller, the poet I mentioned earlier, friend of Beethoven. So I think synthesizing is a key to peacemaking. So this is where philosophy of enlightenment starts peacening, to use a word coined by my friend in California. Peacening is when we can take rival discords, like let's say Hamas and IDF. You'd think absolute rivals, not even in the same universe. If you do synthesizing, you see actually they're really pretty similar. The Israeli IDF really love the Israeli people. They want to defend them, especially their women. They get really angry if you do naughty stuff with them. They're really aggressive and violent in defense of their good people. And, well, Hamas are exactly the same. They love their Palestinian people, especially the women and children. They want to protect them. They're very brave, very courageous. They love their God. They love their spiritual teachings. Actually, they're really very similar, these two things. They're like cousins having a war to the death. So if we approach as a philosophy of enlightenment, we can then synthesize these divergent things. We can apply that technique also to the Ukraine-Russia war, because they're very similar people. The reason the Russians and Ukrainians are so like going for it fiercely is they're the same people. Even their language is virtually identical, just dialectical differences. And, you know, obviously the historical and word differences, vocabulary, and they're both very proud. They're both Slavic people, ancient, proud people. They're both Christian, largely, but with lots of other cultures mingled in. And what we should be doing, and I've said this to my both Russian and Ukrainian philosophy friends of mine, we should be having, like, philosophy peacemaking efforts and finding where is enlightenment in these different schools. And it's there. Instead of allowing the warlords, the Putin types, to make us forget that we're actually Homo sapiens. You think we're like really horrible people. No, we're not. We're saints and sages. And it's time we reclaimed that energy. So synthesis is a very important word. Related to that is what I can only call, the other thing that enlightenment brings, or seems to bring if you study it, is a higher perspective. And if you, I mean, for anyone that loves mountain climbing or going up high, like my cat does, whenever she comes in a room, she goes as high as possible so she can look down on everything, like a huntress. And I love doing the same. I love climbing up hills for the view, mountains. And I love to think, as an eagle. So my shamanic animal is an eagle. And Thomas Aquinas put it like this. He said that the job of the philosopher is to be like a mountain, because when you're high up, you receive the rain of the divine intelligence as sooner, and then you can rain it down, like in the Himalayas, say, into the parched lands around you. And so height is really important to the concept of enlightenment. We even use it in slang, did you get high when you talk to that guru or whatever. Being high is like an enlightenment, a little glimpse, if you want. The Rastas love to smoke their holy weed, they call it, and they have discourse that takes them high in the sense of proximity to God. And sacred medicines have been part of this ever since prehistoric man first started, eating wild mushrooms. But another way that the word high relates to, we talk about higher intelligence, higher wisdom, higher mind. Thomas Troud uses these terms as well. And we also talk about higher education. I've been blessed to be a student at some of the best universities in the world, to teach at Oxford and London, and I've sat at the feet of many of the great professors in different universities, and I love it. I get a buzz when I hear someone talking about this stuff that I'm sharing. I feel like I'm coming home, right? Now that's because I'm going to the heights of higher education. And what I realised doing that, when I taught at London University, that's where I discovered the quote of Thomas Aquinas, by the way. It was in Birkbeck College Library, where I used to teach philosophy, evening classes. And, to me, a library is the closest thing to heaven, because, it's peaceful, you can read all the sages of all history. And that's why we call it higher education. Because you're able to go up in your mind to get a higher perspective on things. So if you do a Masters of Music at the Royal College of Music, and you do higher education of music, you learn about musicology, the history of music, philosophy of music, who are the great thinkers of music. Not just how to play an instrument, that's taken for granted. Yes, you've got to play your instrument as well as anyone. But then you think about all the higher perspective of things. Now that's what enlightenment is also about. It's getting that higher perspective. And if we can bring that to bear on our conflicts, our ego battles, then we can turn, ego into eagle, let's say, to coin a phrase. Another way of talking about that, and this is Ken Wilber's famous for this, but also Aurobindo, who discovered it first and was talking about it. Aurobindo, the great Hindu sage, who I've been to his ashram in Pondicherry. He talks about integral knowledge. Integral understanding is when you unite everything into a wholeness. That's what enlightenment is. And his symbol was the upward pointing triangle united with the downward pointing triangle, Shiva and Shakti in union, which is also there in the Star of David, in the Kabbalah. The Jews have worked out the same thing geometrically. So Aurobindo knew this, and Ken Wilber, bless him, an American sort of populist of higher wisdom, has put it all into his schemas, and he talks about integral knowledge. But it's, that's another way of talking about enlightenment, is how you can integrate everything, because the opposite of that is disintegration, which is the state of the world we've got now, There was just a conference for my old colleagues at the Conflict Research Society in the University of Edinburgh a couple of weeks ago, where they had a big conference on fragmentation, even among peace and conflict researchers. Everyone's doing their own little bit of the thing. And who's bringing us all together? What's the opposite to fragmentation? Well, it's synthesis and it's integration. And that's what enlightenment is. So I'm the guy for the Peace and Conflict Research Society who's been bashing on about this for 30 years. We've got to do enlightenment studies as well as all the details of this or that conflict, if we're going to get peace. Because peace is one of the products of the Enlightenment consciousness. Okay, just a few more words, and then we'll have a few questions, and then I've got a little thing to do at the end. So the integral view, and also John Gebser, another great philosopher, talks about this. He was sort of Swiss French. He wrote a book called The Ever-Present Origin, which is like a 600-page masterpiece. He was an art historian and philosopher and a friend of Picasso and all the modern artists. He was briefly Minister of Culture in the Spanish Republic, chased out by Franco and the fascists, ended up in Switzerland where they couldn't get him, and he just devoted himself to thought and study and writing. And he left this masterpiece. And he looks at how the history of art reflects the evolution of consciousness at different times, primitive art, Renaissance art, modern art. And he says that with the breakdown of perspective, modern art is about perspective goes, which was the great Renaissance invention, where time and everything was very ordered. So with perspective, there's that guy, and then there's this guy, and this guy, and it's all in neat lines and rows, and it's all scientific. Modern art is not like that. It's all higgledy-piggledy. It's Picasso playing with dimensions, and what the woman's head is looking that way and that way at the same time. So what Gebser says is that this is about the discovery of transdimensionality. Modern consciousness has made a breakthrough into what he calls the ever-present origin. Perspective is about how the past is the past. The Renaissance reinvented history as a discipline. It's our thing, right? But the artists of modern era realised that everything is everywhere simultaneously, always happening in all dimensions. And that's what the Druids knew. You can access and shapeshift between different dimensions. And Enlightenment is having the freedom to navigate those journeys and come back alive and tell the story, like Taliesin or whatever. So Jean Gebser wrote the theory for this. If you're interested in philosophy, a philosophy of Enlightenment, he's one of the best to read, and just a masterpiece. And also, just to say, he's really into etymologies and languages. Like me, he compiled huge charts of why this ancient Greek word pops up in this slogan in modern American and how they all circle back. And because in language, in speaking, we're speaking from that ever-present origin, which is the pure presence of the divine, which is everywhere, always, simultaneously here. Okay. So I love Gebser's work, and that's what he means integral view, right? That's Enlightenment. Now, when you have that overview of everything, there's no reason to fight or negate or obstruct or block, because everything everywhere is coming from the same beautiful place. We're all children of that one ever-present origin. So then non-violence arises naturally. That was Gandhi's point, and Martin Luther King, and Christ's, who we're going to hear from tomorrow. Ultimately, love will win, because it is the force behind us all. It is the beauty within us all. So, other words, liberation, okay, is another way of talking about enlightenment. People talk, I want to reach liberation. I always wonder, what is it you're trying to be liberated from? Like, I have a slight difficulty with this idea of I want to liberate from my body. I've met people that say, I hate this world, I want to be liberated, I can't wait to not come back here, I hate this world, it's so full of evil people. I think I'm more on a Mahayana path than that. I'm going to keep coming back till it all reaches fully enlightened, which is what we should be doing, right? Because this planet is beautiful. Can you imagine what it would be like if we can stop all the wars, end poverty, end hunger, and just play and study, and, that's what we should be doing. Like, all yogis united for enlightenment is what I say. And so liberation, yes, but